And also, you had started working back in the day, like with Disco's boy Vince Russo.
Vinny Roo. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I got him in. I was.
How old were you, and how old was Vince?
Vince and I are probably a year apart or 2 years apart, maybe. Well, we worked with each other for a very short time, but it was the end of 91. 91 into 92. So he had a video store called Will the Thrill Video. And one of my listeners, he was this 14-year-old listener of mine, said, this guy Vince Russo has a video store. He could be maybe an advertiser for the radio show. He books wrestlers there sometimes. So this kid, Andrew Goldberg, convinced Russo to listen to my radio show. Then we got together for a meeting, and that's when it started. He started advertising with me, and I started helping him book a few other wrestlers into the business, and Vince wanted to get in the business. So that's how we formed the business, and Vince really was very aggressive. And I was on a radio station, WGBB on Long Island. It was probably 10,000 watts. It was heard on Long Island, Jersey, parts of Brooklyn, and Vince was like, we got to take this show to New York, where we could have a big audience, and you're big in the business. Maybe we start a newsletter together, and so we formed this partnership. But Vince didn't really understand what I was doing at that point of my life in the wrestling business. I had a radio show that basically tore the curtain down. It was behind the scenes. It was not kayfabe. It was guys coming on out of character, talking about what was going on. I was covering all the scandals that were going on at that time. And Vince was more into the let's kind of have fun with this. We had a different direction, but he never really bothered to. He wanted to weigh in. I mean, I don't want to rehash all of the stuff that went on with Vince. I just did a podcast with him when after all these years, we kind of cleared the air a little bit. But he and I had a really major fallout, bad public fallout, and it was an ugly situation. Because he had one way of wanting to do things. I had another. He thought that, the media was crucifying McMahon for the things that were going on. But I think Vince Russo just wanted to be in the business. And he used me, and he would readily admit it. He used me to get into the business. And then he went through me, faster than shit goes through a goose. And he went to the next level really fast. And then talked his way in and became who he became.
But you guys have since had cleared that up, right?
The thing is with Vince Russo, I mean, I never was going to respond to him. He wrote the book. He wrote a chapter about me, and he had facts wrong. He's saying I was a guy living with my mother. I was living with my mother. She was living with me because I was a caretaker. He was like, John looked at me as a mark. And so, I mean, it was just all of those the disagreements that happened in that short period of time we were together that lasted over all the years. And then finally, after his book came out, I let that go. And then November, he, on one of his podcasts, he was talking about him against all the dirt sheet writers, who a lot of them I respect. But he then talked about the beginning of his career and how I was this guy who was living with my mother, and I looked at him and I, for money, and it was just kind of like it was his way of telling the story, which was not 100% true or accurate, or that was his version of it.
That was his narrative. Basically. That was
in his, yeah. So right. We're able. When my nephew sent me the podcast, I said enough is enough. I'm going to go reach out. That's when I started the Twitter account, just to kind of get my name out there.
You just now started a Twitter account?
November, yeah. I've been away for 25 years, man. I haven't been.
Right, that's like
most people thought I was dead.
You probably, let me tell you something. If you just started a Twitter account, the last probably 10 years of your life have probably been relatively stress-free.
Oh, what I got? I left the wrestling business to change my name.
Twitter is going to drive you nuts. Trust me.
I got 3 million impressions on my account since November, which is I'm putting films up that are getting like 15,000 views, 30,000 views.
The shit that he has is historic.
Yeah, and I'm a marketing guy. I know how to market myself. But Wade Keller 3 years ago was like, "Do you have any of your old radio shows?" Wade, I have every one of them, because people ask about you all the time. They think you're dead, this and that. So I gave him some of my shows, and he put them up on his VIP site, interviews with me and Ultimate Warrior and all this great content from years ago. And then all of a sudden I start getting calls once in a while. Hey, would you do this podcast? This guy passed away. Would you talk about that? So I became like a little historian. And then people wanted to hear the story about Russo. And so I just started doing a little bit more of that. Right. And it wasn't until I kind of like, the stuff that I have, I think there's a market for it today. The films, the pictures, the radio shows, all the videotapes when I was a promoter that people have never seen. It was just packed away. And then I was like, after the Russo thing, and I started a Twitter account, I'm like, man, people are kind of coming out of the woodwork remembering me. And when you have a guy like Sean Waltman, you changed my life by putting me in the wrestling convention. And this kid who introduced me to Vince Russo, this little snotty, just nerdy kid, reaches out to me last week, and he's like, I've been looking for you for 27 years. He goes, you gave me the time of day. You introduced me to Mick Foley, and you let me volunteer at some of your conventions. And he goes, you gave me enough balls to start my own company and my own business. And I developed computer programs, which I sold by the age of 40. Now he's a multimillionaire. And he's like, if it wasn't for you, I would have, who knows where I would have become. So I'm getting stories like that constantly from people. I was like, I didn't realize that I had an impact on some people's lives the way I did, and it makes me feel good actually that I left with a positive impact. I
got a question. Have you been following the business over the years, or have you been like okay? Do you still have you been watching it like on a consistent basis, or do you kind of like you're in and out?
No, I've been watching it the whole time.
Have you been reading the Meltzer's newsletter and everything?
I go on and off with that. You know. Let me ask
you a question, because this is what aggravates me. Okay, and like I know Vince personally. Conan knows Vince personally, and the treatment that he gets, it's a lot of it is his own doing, because he's very antagonistic towards these guys. But do you think the treatment that Vince has gotten over the years from the dirt sheet guys has been fair?
He got off to a bad start with all of them in the beginning, because he trashed them from day one. Right. He trashed them from day one. And the thing was with Vince, when he came and we did our first newsletter, and I sent it out to Dave and Wade and everyone else because they were excited I was doing a newsletter, they thought his writing was juvenile. They didn't see where he was coming from, because they were journalists, and Vince claimed to be a journalist. Right. And then when he put out his first newsletter trashing everyone, that's what set the line. He could not recover from that.
So this is an old school beef, much older than I ever realized. Yeah. Wait a minute, this goes way back to
when I was actually in the way Vince and I were fighting so much. After just a few months, I got on the phone with him and Meltzer to see if Meltzer could talk a little sense into him, because at that time I knew, Dave knew, everyone knew that the WWF was trying to divide and conquer us, because Vince was meeting with them separately without me, without telling me even, and that's what kind of started. But today, Vince Russo, I mean, he can't go back. I don't think like Wade sent me an email, and no one wants to, I don't want to discuss Vince Russo. That part of my life is over, but I feel bad for him. And I genuinely think that he's got a lot of remorse inside him now, that he wants to be loved and he wants to be accepted.
I've known him for 20 years. I think this is what I think Vince has gone through. I think that he was kind of very, I don't want to say condescending, very, very cocky. Okay, because when I met him, because he came off a very successful run at WWE, and when he came to WCW, very cocky, very confident in himself, and very, very set in his ways and what he wanted to do. Yep. I think over time he's learned humility. Okay, and like he's become more of a humble person. I think what's happened over the past few years since he started podcasting and getting himself back out there, it kind of threw gasoline on the fire to his relationship with the dirt sheet guys back over the years, and it kind of rekindled. Right. Because what happened when Vince got back into the, he was out of writing for TNA for a little while. Then he started podcasting. When he started podcasting, those guys, Vince Russo's back in the thing. Okay, I'll start trashing him again a little bit. like when his name comes up. And I think that's I think that's kind of like the dynamic that we've seen over the years. And Vince decided because he has to make a living. He has that show, the Cash Train, the Marks of the Dirt Sheets, was his most successful show. He's basically just put the gloves back on and decided to fight these guys.
Yeah. I think he's trapped.
Right.
I think he would love to. And I've had a couple of private conversations with him even before we did this podcast, because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't being worked. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to be sabotaged. And I wanted to make sure that we were going to speak as gentlemen and not characters.
Right.
Not vicious Vincent. I didn't want that. I wanted me and Vince as a human. And when we talked, and he was like, brother, I mean, I wish I can get out of this. I wish there was something else I could do. I wish I could do something else, but he can't. And the reason he can't now, because he's much older. Mm-hmm. I mean, I literally, I'm in my 50s. I got fired from a job at a record company 5 years ago, and I couldn't get another entree in here until I started my own business. And now I'm back in. But you have to reinvent yourself. And in his case, it's almost impossible for him to reinvent himself at this late stage of his life. And even though he may have the best of intentions right now, he's still pissing on them in his way. Right. And so there can never be détente. With me, there's détente because I forgive. I've accepted.
Well, here's the thing that aggravates me with those guys. Okay, is bro, you and Vince rekindled, aired everything out, and had a conversation.
Right.
Vince is willing to do that with all of those guys. They refuse to do it with him.
Right.
And that's what bothers me. I'm like, come on. I'm like, guys, we're all adults.
Everyone has to make their own decision.
Right.
And when he brought up other people, I'm not here to discuss Meltzer, Keller. I respect them, but I'm not here to talk about them. I'm here to talk about us. But they won't do it. I don't believe they will. I believe they're just so over him that they're not even going to give him that chance to even talk it out. In my life, I'm going to be 62 this week. And I'm not holding grudges against anyone.
It's ridiculous that those guys are willing to take it to their grave.
Some people
they're almost willing to take it to their grave, and I'm like, come on, guys, this is
and as an
so counterproductive. Right? Yeah,
it's
so counterproductive.
I mean, I was brought up where you take it to the grave.
Mm-hmm.
But and I'm not. That's not in my DNA. I want to have a. I want after, but I went into that interview and and he cried in it, and it was unfortunate, but. Because I said over all these years, I considered you my enemy, and I don't like that word. But you were my enemy. You were my enemy for over 20 years because I resented. I was bitter towards you, and I hated him. I literally hated him. But I don't anymore because I saw the other side of him.
Right.
I had breakfast with him with my nephew, and I've talked to him a couple of times. Yeah. So. Yeah, I mean, I wish him the best.
And you know what I think, John? Not only that, you get all that fucking negative energy out of you that does absolutely no good.